I want to thank my friends at the Center for Immigration Studies for inviting me. It's nice to be back with you guys. And I also want to tip my hat to Steve Camarota and Karen Ziegler for a fine paper here. I enjoyed reading it. It is a very good diagnostic on a part of the American prospective projection future that isn't usually explored. So I think that this is a serious addition that people should look at and analyze and use to inform the debate, which will inevitably confront us. Steve shared with me a number of the results which were not published, went through those as well. I did not actually get down to the guts of the model and do it, but everything looks completely the way that it should. And the absolutely unassailable conclusions which this paper emphasizes are basic factors that come out of population arithmetic or population math. And two of the most important are these. One of them is that immigration cannot possibly, over the long run, maintain a youthful population structure for a country. The arithmetic doesn't work on this. There was a wonderful illuminating experiment at the UN Population Division about 2 decades ago under Joseph Chamy. Projections on replacement population, what was necessary to maintain the size or the structure of a country. As Oxford's David Coleman noted in a paper he did discussing that, it would have taken more than the population of the world to maintain South Korea's then youthful population structure for 60 or 70 years into the future. It just doesn't work, so we know that. Another thing which is also inescapable as a matter of population arithmetic is that raising the age of retirement has a bigger bang than immigration in affecting the proportion of so-called working age population in a country. And if you take a look at Table 5 in this paper, you'll see this laid out very clearly. Even a zero immigration future for the United States would end up with a higher proportion of so-called working age population by raising retirement age by 2 years than the Census Bureau's autopilot assumption of migration. Those are just simple arithmetic facts. So let me offer some comments and qualifications of my own, or some thoughts of my own about what came to me as I looked at this. One thing I would suggest in the way of, I hope, constructive criticism is that in the online version of this study, this very good study, I think it would be beneficial to readers to present population pyramids, to just present the visual, because I think that people understand intuitively much better how population composition is changing if you can see it than if you see a row of figures. And I think that would clarify some of the changes that lie ahead of us in a way that you can't necessarily see just by looking at a row of numbers. I think a couple of things would come out of that. For instance, number one, any projection with lower net migration to the U.S. for the future, for the next 40-plus years, will perforce mean lower aggregate working-age population growth. And there are a lot of ifs here, but all other things being equal, that would also mean a slower aggregate rate of economic growth for the United States. There are disamenities, which Steve mentioned, and those disamenities and risks are considerable, but there are also potential amenities from this, not the least of these being the potential GDP growth. A second thing to bear in mind, now this is not in the paper because the paper takes the Census Bureau's assumptions. The second thing to bear in mind is whether the Census Bureau's projections will actually turn out to be accurate about future fertility trends for the United States. There is no reliable method anywhere for projecting fertility into the future. They're just, and as long as this is a matter of human volition, it's unlikely that we're going to come up with a neat method of accurately doing this into the future. And at the moment, whereas the census autopilot assumption was a not unreasonable 2 births per woman, looking at the past generation for the United States, right now we're at a bit over 1.7. And there are at least reasons to wonder whether a noticeably below replacement trend may not be part of the American future as well. I won't predict that. I don't know how to predict it, but we can see that the United States has been the exceptional large country in the OECD with respect to fertility for a very long time, and there are people who have been arguing that that exception is going to come to an end. Ron Lesteg, one of the authors of the so-called second demographic transition, most prominently among them. If the United States has a appreciably lower fertility level in the decades immediately ahead than is projected, then the U.S. starts to look a lot more as if it's on a Western European trend, with more aging, slower labor force growth, and with slower immigration and slower labor force growth, it starts to look much more like a Western European population. The third question, and this is one which has to do with the real existing America, is whether a future in which we have less immigration and higher retirement ages will also mean we have not just a higher proportion of working age population in America, but a correspondingly high proportion of people who are actually working. As has been mentioned, I did a little bit of homework a few years ago on the very troubling trends for labor force participation for American men in the past generation or so. And those trends are particularly troubling for native-born American men.
Less educated in particular. Yeah.
Less educated. The epicenter of the problem is native-born high school or no high school degree men who are not married, who have never been married, who have not have their wife and children. If you look at that group, the most recent figures that I've seen is that their labor force participation rates are about 50%, extraordinarily low. Whereas for less educated, married or unmarried immigrant counterparts, the labor force participation rate is in the 90+%. It's kind of indistinguishable from native-born college-educated guys. This is a social problem in the United States entirely apart from the migration question. This is something which I think is a crisis in the United States that we have to deal with for intrinsic reasons, having to deal with the distress of this group in our society. But until and unless we manage to raise the labor force participation rates, especially for men, towards the much higher rates that we see in general for immigrant men, I don't think we can be confident that we'll get the sort of employment rate response that we want to and that we'd like to see in this paper. So thank you very much.